Welcome to the Baker Tilly U.S. podcast, an online community developed to connect you to our partners and leaders across the globe. Subscribe today to continue discovering new and unique ways that Baker Tilly can enhance or protect your value as we discuss timely, relevant, and impactful topics. Our current series is specific to real estate professionals. We recognize that the coronavirus is affecting real estate companies and organizations across the world in unique ways. In this podcast, we will speak with Baker Tilly practice group leaders about practical real estate guidance to help you through the next several weeks and to prepare your business and employees to come back strong in the future. Let's get started.
Welcome to this week's podcast of BuzzHouse, where you can find all the buzz affecting the multifamily industry, especially right now in light of the pandemic. I am Bernards, and I lead Baker Tilly's firm-wide multifamily housing practice. And I'll be talking with my partner, Garrick Gibson, who also specializes in consulting and multifamily housing transactions. If you weren't able to catch our first podcast, Garrick and I reviewed what I'll call an asset management checklist that multifamily owners should be working through now, understanding that owners have been very focused on health and safety of tenants and employees, but need to focus on both cash flow sensitivity for projects under construction, stabilized properties, and also cash flow at your corporate level. Today, we'll discuss what has been happening legislatively in April, what the affordable housing industry is still working on to see if we can get in future legislation, and a few other miscellaneous matters. There have been a lot of concerns among the housing tax credit industry about various deadlines, from the 10% test to place and service requirements, among other deadlines. As noted earlier, many efforts are being put into health and safety to have to divert efforts from this to meet code-required deadlines really doesn't make sense. So again, addressing these timelines. Garrick, to that end, earlier this month, the IRS published Notice 2020-23, which had various relief for taxpayers affected by the coronavirus pandemic. Let's start with discussing the provisions around these extensions. Would you be able to highlight some of these provisions?
I certainly can, Don. The notice provides that taxpayers have until July 15, 2020 to perform specified time-sensitive actions to be performed on or after April 1, 2020 and before July 15, 2020. As a result of this ruling, taxpayers have until July 15, 2020 to perform any of the time-sensitive actions I will mention shortly if they were originally due to be performed on or after April 1, 2020 and before July 15, 2020. So items such as 10% test, pursuant to Section 42, if your 10% test requirement due date is within that time frame, you now have until July 15th. Other items notable in Section 42 would be your 24-month period rehabilitation expenditures, if it lies within that time frame. You also have the minimum set-aside requirement. If it's in that same time frame, there's the 10-year hold rule for claiming credits on an existing building. You also have the requirement that a low-income housing commitment must be in effect at the beginning of the year for a building to receive credits as referenced in Section 42. So those are some of the Section 42 issues that you might have specific deadlines that are within that window. Pursuant to the regulations 1.42, you have other items such as any owner annual certifications of compliance. You might have some annual tenant income certification requirements or any binding agreements that possibly might be signed within that time frame pursuant to any taxes and bond issues. And those are pretty much most of the notable ones there. There's probably a lot more that could be mentioned, but just keep in mind, you're really trying to think about what's landing within the April 1st, 2020 time frame up until July 15th, and you have until July 15th. Both that notice, the 2020-2023 and a housing credit disaster guidance and IRS Rev Proc 2014-49 provide extensions for the 10% test deadline for housing credit allocations. However, keep in mind the notice I just mentioned applies only to projects that would have been needed to meet their 10% test between the April and July 15th date and only allows for an extension up until July 15th. While the Rev Proc 2014-49 applies to any carryover allocation in effect prior to the beginning of the major disaster declaration incident period, which has been stated as January 20th, 2020, in all cases, and also allows the extension of up to 6 months from the date of the original 10% test deadline. So you can see the difference. So one is sort of applying at sort of a granular level in all cases, whereas versus Notice 2020-23 is really just a time frame from April 1st to July 15th if it happened to your due date happened to land within that time frame. So moreover, also Notice 2023 does not require any implementing action by the Housing Credit Allocation Agency, while the RevProc, in contrast, 2014-49 does. In addition, allocating agencies will have the ability to offer deadline relief on a project-by-project basis or a statewide basis under the RevProc 2014-49. So hopefully that able to clear some of those differences between the notice and the RevProc that was released.
Gary, that was a lot of great information. And again, the takeaway is we've got the notice for specific timelines, but really the RevProc. Talk to your housing agency, especially if you had deadlines, due July 16th, which doesn't fall within the notice. But again, your state housing authority can make extensions for that on a deal-by-deal basis. On another note, Garrick, with unemployment continuing to grow, as we all know, we've seen approximately 26 million people now filing for unemployment, almost 1 in 6 workers. We saw the fourth aid package totaling about $484 billion signed by the president on April 24th. Garrick, maybe just a quick summary of this.
Sure. This measure actually includes an additional $310 billion in funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, otherwise known as PPP, which consists of $60 billion reserved for community banks and small lenders. You have $75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion to support testing efforts, and $60 billion for emergency disaster loans and grants. The first $349 billion in the PPP was exhausted, as you know, in less than 2 weeks. And there was already a queue forming, so we expect all the requests to be in pretty soon. I'm not sure where some of the funds are going to that are being returned. Recently in the news, there was some backlash for corporations taking some of these PPP loans, so they've since returned them, and whether or not that money will be included with the funds that are currently here for the queue. Based on my conversations, many in the multifamily industry have already been successful in requesting these loans. That ranges anyone from property managers, developers, general contractors, even some social service agencies out there. It's expected that a majority of these loans will be forgiven, but keep in mind, as discussed in our last podcast, pay very close attention to the compliance of these loans to help ensure that they're forgiven when that time comes. Also, you can please check out our website for the up-to-date information on the PPP program. Our partner, Todd Bernhardt, is leading our efforts on this front, Don.
Well, thanks for that, Garrick, too. Between the legislation signed by the president on April 24th, along with the IRS notices we discussed 2020-23, there's definitely a lot to pay attention to. But almost as important to our industry, though, is what has not been included in any legislation that would be very impactful to the industry and has some lead supporters in Congress. In fact, on April 16th, the lead sponsors of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act sent a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, along with Leader Kevin McCarthy, urging the inclusion of crucial tax policies to support affordable housing as part of pandemic legislations. The letter noted, and let me quote, "This pandemic has only exacerbated the affordable housing crisis our country was already facing. We cannot ignore this crucial area of our economy, and more importantly, the people that rely on this program for affordable housing during this time," end quote. Garrick, what are some of the specific provisions that are included in this letter that you've read?
Well, specifically, and I think one of the more important aspects of it, the bipartisan letter calls on Congress to enact a 4% housing credit rate fix in the next COVID-19 response package. The letter noted that, while federal borrowing rates are slashed, as you know, in response to the pandemic, the 4% housing credit rate is also dropping. It's now down to 3.08% set for May, which is down from 3.12% in April. And it's likely to decline even further, threaten the viability of many critical properties. I know on some of the projects I was looking at when they're initially underwritten early in the year, about 3.17 to 3.15, and that was a quick drop. Now at 3.08, they haven't closed yet. You're probably going to see a lot of deferred development fees sort of increase. Maybe there's some delays as well, which are probably causing increased costs. It is important to note that In the 2008 financial crisis, that's when they actually enacted the minimum 9% credit. So maybe the fact that we're in this COVID-19 pandemic crisis, it has some legs to it this time. So I'm looking forward to seeing Congress' decision on what they want to do with this. But that wasn't the only thing they included in there. Together with that fixed 4% housing credit rate, the letter also urges flexibility around the bond financing requirements to allow developments, to use that are using the 4% to utilize a lower threshold for the bond test. So currently it's set at 50%. Everybody says the 50% test. You hear that a lot. So if you don't meet the 50% test, you're not going to get 100% of the credits. This is going to be based on the 50% or 100% or whatever amount you justify lower than 50%. So we expect many projects to have increased costs for various reasons. And we mentioned, some of these in our last podcast. You might have construction delays that are going to cause a lot of interest in, carry, maybe some an additional general requirements that are incurred from the contractor. So that depreciable basis and aggregate basis, if you will, would go up. So the position is to lower this threshold, and they state it down to 25% for buildings placed in service after January 20th, 2020, likely because they were using the COVID-19 incident period as stated by FEMA. That's in general what the letter was sort of discussing. Those are good items, I think. If we can get even half of, at least one of those, a 4% credit, that would be great. As far as economic recovery aspects, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act is also looking to increase the annual housing credit allocation by 50%. So the way they'll do this is they'll try to phase it over 2 years with 25% per year as adjusted for inflation, and it would start in 2021. I think that's definitely a good idea as well. I mean, you keep reading articles that we have a shortage of affordable housing, but the demand is just going to keep increasing. So they need to start doing something, and these are obviously ideas that are going in the right direction.
That's perfect. Garrett, thanks for those updates, and we'll keep our eyes on this very important ongoing discussion and keep you all aware of these as well. Just a couple of other real quick updates around the industry over the last couple of weeks. On April 22nd, HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing issued additional answers for COVID-19 related FAQs. We'll have a link to this on our website, and really the materials address eligible uses of PHA funds, how to prepare for the pandemic, and looking at what do we do if there's infections in your facilities and so forth. So again, we'll have a link to the updated FAQs on our website. Also, on April 17th, HUD released the 2020 National Housing Trust Fund dollars, which total $322.5 million, or a 23% increase over the 2019 levels. So on that front, check in with your state agencies or other groups that are administering these dollars for your state and to determine how you can utilize them as gap financing in your projects. With that, thanks again for joining us for our podcast. Please reach out to Garrick and I with any questions about potential extensions of key dates that Garrick discussed earlier. We do look forward to continuing to share timely information and ideas around the multifamily industry through our weekly podcast. Next week, please join us for a discussion around refinancing with interest rates back down to historically low levels, along with other pandemic-related loan programs, namely the Main Street program. Again, please check out bakertilly.com for our podcast, asset management checklist, and all COVID-19 related information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. To receive notification when new episodes become available, please subscribe to Baker Tilly US wherever you get your podcast.